I've hit the record button. So
Thank you, Ken.
anybody who misses it can catch up, or you can go back and see what if anything you wanted to see again. Over to you, Max.
Thank you very much, Ken. So, as alluded to, we will be hopping into intersections today, and Ken's already started that recording. Our good friend Wally, he is back today. So please make sure you're you've got your pens ready to start counting Wally again, because he will be popping up in the slides. He's a little bit trickier to find in this module, so you've really got to make sure you're fixing your eyes on every single slide, because he can be a bit tricky. But yes, just a heads up that Wally is back, and this one is not included in the count. So your current Wally stand at 0, but keep your eyes peeled because he will be there. Before I get stuck into the module though, I did just want to quickly share, we've had some awesome assignments that have come through. So thanks everyone that has submitted those on Moodle. You've likely received feedback by now, and you've had your grade as well, and any comments to make the submission even to get even higher marks. But all in all, it's been really awesome to see. It's great to see lots of best practice thinking that's coming through. And we had one or a couple comments in particular that came in one of the intersections for the design. So I'm just going to share the design, this screen here. Hopefully that design has come across. And this intersection with Wellington Street, just wanted to point out, not such a fantastic idea that that this design currently shows. The bicycle lane continues across this intersection as so cyclists would be forced to cycle in that type of direction. However, as you can see, there's actually 2 left turn lanes. So there's a very awkward conflict point at kind of 2 points across this intersection, which would be a very stressful situation if you're a cyclist. What could happen is there could be a motorist on the inside lane, and they are, pausing and giving way to a cyclist that's crossing over. However, a left-turning vehicle in the outside lane may not be able to see that there's a cyclist there because there's a car in the inside lane, and they may just turn left without giving way, and then you've got this, conflict that's occurred. So this current design would be raising a lot of red flags, and it's awesome to see that a few participants picked up on that one specific detail. And you'd hope that that would be addressed in future design revisions. And I've actually got an example of how that could be, I suppose, a little bit mitigated, that risk there. Ken?
I was just going to say, when we run the road safety audit course in a similar format, it's one of the ones I flag as absolute classic road safety auditor thing to look at as soon as you see a double turn of any direction. That masking, dynamic visual obstruction, it's going to cause issues. So it has to be, really addressed, phased out completely, given its own phase, or infrastructure rectification. It's an absolute classic. Good, yeah. So good spotting.
That's the technical term for it, the dynamic visual obstruction, for those that were interested. I'll get rid of the. This is going to be my way now. I will just show you an example though. So this is in Toowoomba, and you can see, so this is a bicycle lane, on-road bicycle lane next to the parking lane, and we've got 2 lanes of through traffic here, and we're approaching an intersection. So coming towards the screen, there's an intersection that's coming up, and it's got that similar design where there's going to be a left turn lane that is like a predominant movement, and the cyclists, they want to carry on through. So this is an example of how they've managed that conflict point to reduce the risk of any collision. So I'm just going to spin around here so you can see how they've managed it. And you can see a big block of green conflict paint to get cyclists away from the left-hand side or away from parked vehicles, to shift across and take a more central position in the carriageway. You can also see the pavement arrows there are indicating that motorists should be, hopping across the bicycle lane and turning left. So that's what those kind of funny little squiggles are, just to indicate that that's the movement there, and some additional warning that it's left turn only from that lane. But you see that that massive blob of paint has just shifted cyclists out into the center of the carriageway to then take a more central position. And this is the intersection as is. So you're brought up to the left-hand side of the through lane, and then the left turn is at the curb side there. Ken.
Oh, good point came in there around the head start box. Does that help? And I suppose my answer would be that in some situations, and in some situations, no.
We do talk about head start boxes, so I might leave that comment for later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, good pick up. The head start boxes is there as well. This is just one way that you could deal with this interaction, but there is another way that would be perhaps a preferred approach, which would be called a protected intersection, which we are looking at today, and we're going to jump into the details of what that is.
Another one from Mark came in. Multi-lane crossing in the background, are they still in place in Queensland? I'm not sure where that was in the background. Was there a pedestrian crossing in the background somewhere?
I didn't see a pedestrian crossing. I'm not too sure.
Anyway, okay, we might just clarify.
This is Ruthven Street in Toowoomba, if you wanted to have a look at that. If you've got
right at the start of this, he said. And
oh yeah, maybe there was. So yeah, you're right. Good pickup. Yep, there is a zebra crossing over multiple lanes there.
Oh yeah, there's another dynamic visual obstruction classic. Yeah, you would not. No jurisdiction would be built. I would hope be building that from the start. The only way that there is a way to build a multi-lane pedestrian crossing like that, but you basically have to do refuges between each lane to open up the sight lines and have a pausing ability. And even then, that's not great. But essentially, for that one, if you've got two vehicles coming along, one masks the view of the crossing pedestrian. It's pretty much in the Austroads guide and in the Australian Standard, it's a no. So I don't know how that one's sort of slipped through. Anyway,
might give a prize out there. That's a pretty good vision. I didn't even notice that. So
there's Mark again. He's on
Mark
fire.
Again. He's on fire. Beautiful. Anyway, I just wanted to share that as a real example of how these conflicts can be managed. And this is perhaps a cheaper option, but yeah, in terms of best practice, protected intersections, which we'll hop into today.
Sorry, the other one was Matt. I'm getting Matt's and Mark's mixed up. Sorry, Mark. First one for Mark, and Matt got the other one. Carry on.
All right, let's go for it. For those who have watched last module's 360-degree footage, you would have had experience with the protected bicycle lane in example 1, and then riding right next to the dooring zone in example 2. And hopefully you got a very real perspective of the level of safety you feel in both examples, and just how protected cycle lanes just above and beyond of creating a really safe and comfortable experience for cyclists. So if you haven't had a chance yet to view that, strongly encourage you to get on the VR headset or just watch it on your PC, because it's a really good example. As mentioned, we will be getting stuck into intersections today, and we've got this very appropriately named guidance document called "Don't Give Up at the Intersection." It is a US guidance paper, so a lot of the images that we used in this webinar, we've just flipped it around, so we're not driving on the right-hand side, we're driving on the left-hand side, just so you're a little bit easier to comprehend. But it's a really good resource. It's publicly available, so you don't need to be a member of the states to look at it or to use it. And the reason that we are referencing this and other international papers is because we don't quite have, in Australian or New Zealand context, this level of detail in our own jurisdictional papers. So Austroads hasn't released anything quite as encompassing as what this document has. So I'm a big fan of this one. There's lots of awesome information. We can spend a lot of time in today's webinar talking about protected intersections. If you've never heard of the term, then we'll just go straight into exactly what the definition is and how they can be applied and some of the considerations you need to look at when designing for protected intersection. Best way to, I suppose, formulate these into actual practical, practice examples is just to look at exactly how they have been installed. So there's plenty of them internationally. United States has a few. There's several of them in Europe. As you could imagine, the Netherlands, they are big fans of these. So it's certainly very common to see them on their network. And there's also one in Melbourne that will show this. And this one is a local example. So we've got some real footage there. We've also been involved in several stages of the design of Melbourne's protected intersection. So we've got some pretty good insight. So that's why we've included it in today's session. I should also mention that there's one in Queensland, or a couple in Queensland as well, in Caloundra. So they're starting to get a little bit more popular, I suppose you could say, but a lot of designers still wouldn't fully comprehend how these could be installed or, the purpose of them and stuff. So we just want to go back to the fundamentals of why you would look to do these protected intersections and the benefits that they offer. We'll also spend a bit of time talking about signalized intersections. We'll look at the head start boxes, as I mentioned earlier. Some left turn and through treatments. Those can also be a little bit tricky to, get a best practice design in, but we'll have a brief chat about that. We'll get stuck into hook turns as well. They're fairly popular here in Victoria, and I know they're used in New Zealand as well. Not every jurisdiction uses them, but I'm certainly a big fan of them. I think they offer good level of safety for cyclists. And we'll finally just finish on bicycle signals and the importance of things like head starts and things like that. So a fair bit to cover today. Would encourage you to continue to jot down all your thoughts in the chat, and we'll get to those questions as they come through. But to get stuck into it, here's an example, an artistic rendition of a protected intersection. And this one is the Melbourne protected intersection. A few features that should immediately stand out is you've got these kind of corner refuge islands, and they are located at each quadrant of the intersection. And you've also got little kind of waiting areas. It's hidden behind that banner there, but little waiting areas for cyclists to pause and queue. That's actually in front of the vehicles or the motorists. So the motorist stop line is, back here, whereas a cyclist would wait ahead of them, similar to a head start storage box. They're placed in front of the motorist as well, which is a really good feature. But perhaps one of the most critical design features that you've got within this protected intersection, and I might just get rid of all my scribbling now just to make this a little bit clearer. But you've got an offset from our general traffic lane to where the cyclists are crossing. So this offset is really critical. And that's all to do with sight lines. And we'll have a look at some examples to send that message home, but just keep that in mind. It's that offset that is really important for these protected intersections. In a traditional intersection, a cyclist would be riding right up against that left turning vehicle or that, that carriageway. So instead of a cyclist riding there, the cyclist is riding further offset from the traffic lane. And that's really what creates the benefit for these protected bicycle lanes. It will perhaps be made clearer from this slide here. So this diagram, as mentioned, has been taken from the NACTO resource there. But in the conventional intersection, where there's a smaller offset, there's a reduced ability for motorists who are turning left into the intersection to be able to see an oncoming cyclist. And that's particularly relevant if there's, any sightline obstructions. There could be parked cars or something that would make cyclists difficult to see on approach to the intersection. And if you're a motorist turning left, you could imagine if you're in this position, to be able to kind of turn your neck and spot a cyclist that's behind you is very challenging. Instead, opting for a protected intersection design, what we're really providing is a greater offset from the bicycle lane where they cross the intersection and that traffic lane, particularly the left turn traffic lane. And that means where the cyclists are crossing, it's within the line of sight of the driver that's turning left. So it's no longer behind, the cyclist is no longer behind the driver's field of view. It's kind of right in front of them, or, a little bit to their left, but it's much more easier to be able to spot oncoming cyclists. So it reduces the risk of that collision. And that's really what's the whole point of it is. You want to create a safer intersection environment for cyclists that are traveling through. And it's that left turn movement that time and time again, you do see those conflicts and trauma occurring. So this is a really awesome intersection design. And this feature helps to reduce that risk significantly. Got this other example here. This is from TMR documents up in Queensland. It just shows you, once again, a different layout of these two different intersections. So we've got a conventional intersection shown on the left-hand side here with the bicycle lane, and they would presumably traveling in this type of direction. And you can see that the offset to that motor vehicle is fairly negligible. There is actually a separator there, which I wouldn't say is conventional. That's not installed on every intersection, but it's good to see that they've called that a conventional intersection. At least there's some degree of separation. But if we compare that to what a protected intersection looks like, you can see those little corner refuges that I talked about before, or sometimes they're called blister islands or corner islands. They've got a few different names, but you can see that they've been installed, and that is an actual physical, barrier. So motorists don't try and cut the corner and they don't try and come across onto the bicycle lane. It's a physical, barrier in place. So they have to take a more sweeping curve. They have to slow down. And when they do cross the bicycle lane, it's within their field of vision. Ken.
Lots of questions coming in, Max. So, lots of which you're going to be covering as you explain these more and show examples and those sort of things. In terms of the kidney island there, or whatever you want to call it, it's a mountable curve. Is that correct?
So we will go into the detail of what those curves look like. It's a really good question though, because you do have to consider what type of vehicles are there. Have you got an adequate turning radius? And if it is like a semi-mountable curve, will it be traversed too often? And there's a bit of specific detail advice that we will give later on in this presentation.
Yeah. And along with that, some people are sort of questioning whether larger vehicles will mount and those sort of things, which you're going to cover, I know, and you've got some video of these sorts of things. The other one's a bit of discussion here around the legal implications of green paint and what that means, and whether that gives legal status for the bike. My understanding is that the vehicle turning left must give way to the bike, and at least in most jurisdictions, that's the law, is that the left turning vehicle has to give way to the bike going through anyway. So that's just highlighting that conflict point. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Although there's also another road rule. I know in Victoria, I'm not sure other jurisdictions, but a cyclist on the left-hand side of a left-turning vehicle, they can't pass in front of a left-turning vehicle. So if they see the left blinker go on, they're meant to slow down and let the left-turning vehicle go. I don't think that could apply to the protected intersection where you've actually got two different facilities, but you might need a barrister to confirm the exact legal requirement in those instances.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the discussion going on as to whether you need a separate phase for the bikes in this, or it runs with the green for the vehicles as well, and just whether that's a point of confusion or anything like that. But I think you can elaborate and expand on that. Thanks, Max. Keep going.
Thank you, Ken. Keep the questions coming through. Okay. Another just quick little diagram to show how this is working. So this one was the one in Caloundra that I mentioned before. But you can see the offset from that would be the traffic lane there to our bicycle lane over here. That's a really wide offset. And that's a really good thing to be having at these intersections. We compare that to a conventional intersection, and if there's a left turning vehicle there and I'm cycling through, very difficult for that left turning vehicle to be able to spot me as a cyclist and heading across that intersection. So providing that offset is really, really critical in these designs. And that's probably what I'm going to keep reiterating as we're going through this presentation. I've got this other diagram which just shows the key features of protected intersections. And this is, as I mentioned, an international resource. So it may not be the exact layout and terminology that we're used to seeing. However, it does provide the general principles and guidance that we can adopt to our own jurisdictional requirements. So just to hop through them, we've got item number 1 there, the corner refuge island, number 1, and you can see it in the plan view as well. This one I would flag immediately. I would not be putting any fixed objects in that corner refuge island because they will get struck. Unless you've done all your swept path checks and you know for a fact that no one will ever, possibly mount that curb. I certainly wouldn't be putting any fixed objects there, because even if it passes all the swept path checks, it's still maybe an unfamiliar environment to general motorists, and they may not notice that there's a corner refuge island there, or there's a physical, impediment there, and they may just drive straight over it. And we have an example of that in the module 3 VR 360-degree video. So we've got an example of exactly that occurring. So just because you've got these little raised curved areas doesn't mean every single motorist is going to pay attention to that and acknowledge that it's there. And, some will cut the corner essentially. So yeah, I would kind of scratch that little piece off this diagram, but just something to note. Item number 2 is a forward bicycle queuing area, or just a bicycle queuing area. So that's that little stop line or the hold line that I showed before on the first slide. That's actually an area where cyclists can prop and wait for their green to go. So they're not within the live carriageway. They're kind of offset from the live carriageway, which is really beneficial. And they've got their own spot to wait. And it's also away from the pedestrians as well, which I think is a big win. You don't really want them to have to share the space, particularly at crossing points, just because of the speed differential. So it's good that there's those separate areas that you've got there. We've got the motorist yield zone, item number 3. So that's, kind of taken as where the motorists should be giving way. That's more the terminology that we'll be using. It may not look like the types of crossing that we would install, in Australia and New Zealand, but hopefully you get the general gist of what this is trying to achieve. There's pedestrian crossing islands. And they are, just those little splitters, I suppose, that help separate the journey, help to split it up. But one of the another key part of this design that I really like, and the reason we've included it in these slides, is item number 5, which is a pedestrian crossing of the separated bike lane. So number 5 there, you'll see that there's those zebra line markings, and essentially that gives pedestrians the priority to cross over the bike lane, as opposed to the other way where cyclists can ride on through. So what I mean by this is a cyclist would be traveling, in this direction, and they would need to pause at this point here and give way to any pedestrians crossing before continuing in their bicycle lane. And I think that's a really sensible thing to do, rather than just let cyclists, giving them the priority and making pedestrians pause and wait, it's probably a better outcome to flip that priority, give it to the pedestrians who would already be, get the green light and they're expecting to continue on their journey. So yeah, just it's a minor detail, but one can make a pretty big difference, is giving your pedestrians the priority where they cross over the bicycle path. Ken?
I was just going to say, it's a little hard to visualize that one with that diagram because it's a US one and they will mark a signalized crossing with a zebra crossings as well. So we might block that out or something for future ones. But there's the examples coming up. I think it'll make it clearer. There was a comment there around the storage area for that turning vehicle and where it props so vehicles can continue through unabated from that. Is that a common thing to do, or does it just depend on the road width you've got available and maybe how much you're prioritizing the movement of that traffic through?
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes these left turns lanes are exclusive, so it's only left turn. So you may not necessarily need to worry about the through that's coming behind them, because they may be a separate through facility that's adjacent. If, however, if it was a left and through type of arrangement, then you would need to consider what that offset would be, how much space you've allowed for that propping effect to occur. And if it was, deemed a significant risk, then it would be a matter of, offsetting further and further the cyclist facility to enable that prop vehicle to store there safely. However, the further that you offset the cyclist facility, the more circuitous the route becomes, or, the more out of the way the route becomes, which may make that connection less and less attractive for cyclists. And the cyclist may just ride straight through the carriageway, as in the general traffic lane. So yeah, there's lots to consider in these examples, and there's no one right answer, I suppose. But
but lots of learning from the one we've got. There was some question around signage as well, and how it's all signed, but I'll let you keep moving on because I think it's easier once you show some examples and photos of the real one. Yeah,
so that's the reason we got stuck into these principles to get started. But I think once we have a look at how these things are installed on the ground, it will start to be a little bit clearer of how the priority works and how motorists are meant to know that cyclists are traveling in that particular space. So let's just hop straight into it. I've got this example here in the Netherlands. This, I'm going to just show you a before and after. So this is a beforehand intersection. You can see that there are off-road facilities at this quadrant here and this quadrant here. However, it's not on every single quadrant, so things do change. But the actual aspect that I'll get you to focus on is the top of the page. If we imagine a cyclist is traveling in this direction here and wants to continue through, such as this, that's their bicycle lane, which is curbside, and it's right up against the general traffic lane. And I'll use another color so we can see what a left turning motorist would be doing at that quadrant as well. They would be doing something like this and turning left into that road there. And hopefully it may not be immediately clear, but for those that have done any of conflict diagrams or anything like that, you'll see that this collision point is a very acute angle. And where you've got acute angles, that should be ringing alarm bells that sight distances will be impacted. And if that doesn't make any sense to you or that's too technical, I'll just perhaps get you to imagine that you were that vehicle that's shown on the blue arrow there, and you're turning left. Very, very difficult to be able to see a cyclist that is behind you and, giving way to them, or, just being able to sight them generally is very challenging. So rather than assume that motorists are always going to make that decision correct, or cyclists are always going to hang back a bit and wait for a left turning vehicle to go, let's acknowledge that humans will make mistakes and instead create designs that allow for those mistakes, or better yet, create or reduce the risk of those collisions occurring in the first place. So this is what it looks like beforehand. And this is afterwards. So this is a protected intersection. And I'll do that same diagram now of how the cyclist and general traffic would travel within this intersection. So a cyclist is coming off road slightly, and they're crossing over in this fashion here before continuing their journey. And it looks like there's an off-road path there as well. The vehicle now that is turning left in this environment, they're coming along in this direction and they are crossing like that. And I might just extend that just so you can see. So if we have a look now at our conflict angle, so what I was talking about before, where those two road users meet, that's perpendicular almost. So that is a much more favorable angle, because what that means is that left turning vehicle would have a cyclist within their windscreen essentially. So it's no longer left and behind, it's more or less straight in front of them where cyclists are crossing. So it's much easier to be able to slow down, give way, and to sight any cyclists there. So it's a really fantastic way to reduce the risk of that cycling vehicle collision. And yeah, just managing that risk altogether, it's awesome. It's a great safety benefit for cyclists at intersections. And generally, if you know, like surveys will tell you that cyclists generally feel less safe at intersections, particularly large signalized intersections. And these are a really good way to help treat that, to make it you know, a more comfortable and safer experience for cyclists. I'm going to show you a few slides now to show you exactly how this looks on the ground. And something that may get you by surprise is the features that are shown on the corner refuge islands. Not something that I would consider best practice. So the corner refuge islands you can see on these slides. Let's have a look how that looks on the ground. They're actually flush with the rest of the pavement, which I'm not sure would work particularly well in Australia or New Zealand, because motorists would just drive straight over that and you wouldn't get the same effect in reducing that risk, because motorists would just treat that as part of their carriageway instead of that's meant to protect me from entering the bicycle space. So they can get away with these things in the Netherlands because at every single intersection, motorists are trained to think that there's going to be cyclists here. I need to slow down. I need to give way. And that's perhaps just part of their psyche and part of the society that they live in. However, not something I'd recommend implementing within our context. As I mentioned, motorists would not be used to seeing that and they wouldn't really know what to do. And even the fact that there's no contrasting pavement, like it all just looks like one environment. Yeah, this is an interesting example from the bird's eye view, from the plan view, but once you get out on the ground, it's probably not something that we would recommend here. And for those that are seeing these features here, they're called shark's teeth. It's also shown there at the crossing as well. That's just what they use as kind of give way line marking. So that's just another way that they do it overseas. Ken?
Oh, sorry. I thought it was more the raised point.
I'm not sure that's raised there. Do you think it's raised?
I don't know. Certainly, like New Zealand would use it, the triangle, the way we use piano key markings, which I was just writing into the chat there.
Yeah.
So I'm not, yeah, it's a little bit confusing, and maybe that says something. We're getting a lot of comments in also around the fact that so many drivers in the Netherlands are also cyclists.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good awareness and the
Yeah.
like. But
This next slide might show that, Ken, a little bit better, but I think it is just all the same level, and it's just indicating that it's give way.
Yep. Okay. Good. Thanks.
No, that's all good. But yeah, same kind of issue. This is all flush or the same level, which, yeah, interesting that it works over in the Netherlands, but maybe not one that we would look to implement here. So instead would be raising those features. So there is an actual physical obstruction that would slow down motorists so they would be aware that they're hitting something. Second example here, this is in the United States. This is in Maryland. Reason we've included this one is it's got those raised corner refuges. So that's shown in those little red parts. But you'll also see it's got this little area where it's hatched, and that's actually kind of it's called a concrete apron. And the idea is motorists would use the concrete apron as their like edge line, so they don't want to be traveling on the concrete apron. However, for longer vehicles or heavy vehicles or articulated trucks and things like that, they may require that concrete apron to be able to turn left. So they may require that additional space to be able to perform their turning maneuver. So this is where you've got kind of two separate refuge islands, one that is flush, which is the concrete apron, or it might be 40 mil above the pavement level. And then another feature that's closer to the bicycle lane, which is raised at curb level height, which would be 120 mil, something like that. If you haven't seen, if you can't picture that in your mind, we'll just hop straight down into the example. But you can see that there is the concrete apron there as well. And then the raised corner refuge as well. So it's got both features. So I'll just reiterate, general traffic should be using the concrete apron as like their edge. So they shouldn't ideally be using that to travel around. However, the intent of having it flush is to allow left turning long vehicles who may require additional space. They don't have to always be colliding with a raised feature, which could have destabilizing issues. So instead, you've got this additional space for them to turn safely. It's super, super common in, I suppose, approaches to roundabouts, even intersections or interchanges. They are a common feature. You may not have seen them at these more, I suppose, smaller footprint intersections, particularly relating to cycling infrastructure. So just want to deliver that message out there that it's an important thing to consider. And if alternatively, if this raised feature was extended all the way and there was no concrete apron there, you just get heavy vehicles striking that constantly. And if there was any signage there, that would get, taken away very regularly. And it just would have a poor outcome for those heavier vehicles. So that's why there's those two different levels there. It's really important to consider, and we will look into that for the Melbourne example as well. This example is in the UK, the Manchester, UK Cycle Optimised Protected Signals, which is a fun little acronym that spells Cyclops Junction. This one may look a little bit more relevant to our jurisdiction. So the green conflict paint, for instance, may look a little bit more familiar. But let's have a look here. So a cyclist traveling along here, stops there and waits for the green light to go for them. Once they get the green, then they can travel along and continue their journey like that. And for a motorist, I'll just do the exact same little anecdote, little illustration there. Left-turning motorists, they're crossing, and look at that. The cyclists are bang on in front of their windscreen. So very easy to see, very easy to slow and give way. It's just a fantastic example of why these protected intersections work so well. Another awesome thing about this intersection, which some may disagree with, but I think is a really good outcome, is you'll see that the bicycle storage area is also indicating that cyclists can pause and wait here. So if cyclists, they don't want to take this way around, or let's just show a right turn, they don't want to have to pause and wait there and then go all the way around. They want to take the journey that's easiest for them. This is most relevant for very confident cyclists. But they can pause here, wait for it to go green, hop into the right turn lane, and then when they get the gap, they can travel there. So you can see that that's, less circuitous. That's a fancy way to say less onerous or less, less distance that they need to travel. And yeah, it just makes it easier for those that are confident. And the reason that I like this example is because it still caters for both levels of cyclist ability. So whether you're, new to riding and you just hate intersections and you're really paranoid of approaching any of them, you've got this opportunity where you can be offset from the left turn lane and you've got a safe alternative to travel through the intersection. Conversely, if you are more confident and you just want to, you're commuting to work, you want to just get there as fast as possible, you're not being forced to take the protected route. You can still, you're still encouraged to travel whichever suits your ability. So I really like that as an example, that it's not precluding one option or another. It's still a road user's choice. Some may argue that we should just be forcing cyclists to take the safest option, which would be the protected intersection, but happy to have that debate. So I think that it's also a valid argument. Here's what it looks like on the ground. Lots of green paint, as you can see. Those bicycle storage areas at the start there, they're huge. So that's indicative that perhaps lots of cyclists would be using them instead. Here's some happy cyclists using that protected facility, but on a nice cloudy day in Manchester. Ken?
A couple of, good discussion going on. Carl's just sort of wanting some insights in pros and cons on having pedestrian crossings within inside the bike crossing point and how that, priority there. So that's one question. That's probably the main one for you to have a go at.
Yeah, no worries. So this is probably a good slide to answer that. So pedestrians they're crossing over in this direction here, and it's at the moment a yellow just pavement marking to suggest that there's some feature that is changing in the bicycle network, because you see it's green on either side. To me, that doesn't communicate priority clearly at all. So whether pedestrians crossing there have the priority or cyclists have the priority crossing there. And whenever you have that confusion, then that's when you're increasing the risk of collisions there. So I think it's really important to be able to communicate exactly who is given priority. And it goes back to that point before where I was saying, if we can give pedestrians priority crossing the the cycling facilities, I think that's a good outcome, because it's universally accepted that zebra markings, we acknowledge that those are pedestrian priority points. Oh, it should be going the other way. Should it? No, that's the right way, yeah. So a cyclist that's traveling along here, they'll see pedestrian zebra markings and then be like, I need to slow down, give way to pedestrians. And then you've assigned that priority and just made that a bit more comfortable there. So it's a good point. Sorry?
Yeah, I suppose also there's more sort of phasing configurations. So pedestrians crossing the road, if they're stuck storing in the island, there's limited space, where if bikes are stuck storing on most of the movements that are continuous flow, or the continuous flow movements, they could actually store as far down as needed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you just may, if there was just continuous streams of bikes, you may actually have pedestrians storing, overflowing from the island. Whereas if if lots of bikes will just end up banking down. Anyway, carry on.
No, that's a good point. And you would also need to consider, if there was one quadrant of the intersection, maybe there's a railway station there and there's heaps of pedestrian volume traffics there, you may have to consider extending this area for pedestrian storage. And if you were having very, very high levels of pedestrian storage or movements in that particular intersection quadrant, you could also look at raising the section, so cyclists are forced to then slow and get back onto footpath level, because that would also communicate to cyclists, okay, I'm definitely not the priority here. I'm back up on the footpath. I need to give way to pedestrians who would be traveling in all sorts of directions. So there's a few things you can do there, but I think it is important to assign a priority and make it clear, who gets right of way.
Great, thanks.
Okay, let's hop to Melbourne. So we've got this example here of how things look beforehand, and we will just progressively show how this intersection was transformed into a protected intersection. At the moment, there is a protected bicycle lane, somewhat protected, very, very narrow bicycle lane with flexible bollards down on that corner there. And as they approach the intersection, it just disappears basically. There's no facility whatsoever, which is unfortunately a pretty common approach to intersection design. There is a little bit of a head start box there, but the left turn lane basically cuts off the bicycle facility. And what that means is a motorist who wanted to turn left, they may not have even seen a cyclist. They're just going to hop straight into their lane. And you've just got that conflict point at a pretty poor angle, and at, it could be high speeds depending on how, depending on what the phasing was. If it was green, then perhaps it would be at a high speed. I might just pause on that. The safe system tolerance for crashes with vulnerable road users, for cyclists, for those that are not familiar. Actually, I might ask that as a question. Does anyone know what is the speed that is considered safe system for a collision between general traffic and either a cyclist or a pedestrian, a vulnerable road user?
Lots of quick 30s there came in.
Yes, so that's correct. Why don't we just give a prize out to the first one there, Ken, the quickest typer, but 30 kilometers per hour is generally seen as the speed that we want to aspire to. If there is a conflict between general traffic and cyclists, we want to make sure that the speeds are at 30 kilometers or lower. And we're miles away from achieving that vision, but that is the aspiration, and that's what we should be looking at within our designs.
And I'll give it to Sam there. Mark and Matt were in also around the same time there as Sam, but they've got prizes already today. So Sam's on the board.
All right, so let's have a look. Half the intersection's now being constructed with a protected intersection. For those who may have noticed, one of the stand-up lanes did get eaten up. So I'll just hop back to the previous slides. There was 1, 2, 3 stand-up lanes. So that's how many lanes at the intersection approach. And now there's only 2. So it's become a left and through movement, no longer just a left exclusive movement. The reason that's been eaten up is because we've extended our bicycle lane. So it's protected, from the mid block all the way to the intersection. So there's a big tick there. Let's not just give up at the intersection as the guidelines suggest. Let's continue all the way to the intersection and then through the intersection. And I'll just extend this all the way now so we can see the protected intersection, but it's pretty clear to see we've got the corner refuges. So they've been consistently installed in all the examples that we've shown. And this is Melbourne's protected intersection. It's on Lansdowne Street, Albert Street is the intersection. As mentioned, we do have the VR 360-degree video, which shows this intersection actually being used and it's operating, and it's a very noisy environment on that particular day. So apologies for the audio quality, but hopefully you get the gist of what we're communicating, and you can just, I recommend when you're watching that video, rather than focusing on the speaker, just turn the headset around so you're looking at the intersection. You can see cyclists traveling through there and all the general traffic as well, because there's some good examples of near misses and things that kind of happen at this real world example of a protected intersection. Here's how the design looked early on as part of functional designs. And I just wanted to talk more in particular about the corner refuge islands. So this went through several audits and design reviews just to make sure this would work in this particular context. But the actual corner refuges, that one little element itself had a whole raft of iterations. So it started out as this tiny little jelly bean, I suppose it looks like to me. And the thinking behind that as well, it's offering some degree of separation or buffer between left turn vehicles and cycling traffic. However, it is pretty small and motorists may not notice it. So let's bump that up. Let's get something a little bit bigger here. And then when they did some swept paths checks, they thought, oh, hang on, this radius and this radius, that may not be smooth enough. So you may have, you know, awkward left turn techniques and may result in drivers just going straight over the things. So let's try and get a more of a sweeping bend on that curve radius. So that's when we've now gone to the iteration of this kind of kidney shape. And then the thinking was, well, what happens if we have lots and lots of cyclists and there's not really a lot of space for cyclists to store and prop and wait for their green light to go. So we could have a risk of cyclists, you know, storing on the carriageway or blocking through traffic or having to come up on the footpath and annoying pedestrians. So let's try and make it a little bit narrower so we can get more cyclists propping and waiting. And that's how we got to this design iteration. So you can see there's lots more space there. And the final, I suppose, design check was once again for that design vehicle. So long vehicles, articulated trucks, those types of things. When they're turning left, we want to make sure that they're not, you know, regularly striking the curb and channel or this mounted feature, because it can destabilize them and it can, have a safety risk associated with that. So let's install some mountable features as well, which is kind of those hashed features or those different colors. It looks a little bit different out there today, but it's the general shape that was agreed and did progress. But to get everyone over the line with this, because this was the first in Victoria and I dare say the first in Australia, I don't think the Caloundra one occurred first, but I'm happy to be corrected. This took a lot of stakeholder engagement. So cycling groups, the local council, the Department of Transport, community groups, etc. They all wanted to make sure that, you know, just because this works overseas, is this really going to work within our particular environment? Will motorists know what they're doing? Will cyclists know that they have to travel around those, you know, corner refuge islands, or are they going to ride straight over it? So what they did to give everyone a little bit of peace of mind and make sure everyone was involved in this process, we did a 1-to-1 scale mock-up, and this is all line marked, exactly the intersection scale. So it's all the correct widths and stuff like that. This is an off-road facility. This is an actual depot. So there's no live traffic in this environment. This is, you know, a completely safe, staged environment. And the idea was, let's actually do some demonstrations of what it feels like as a cyclist and what it feels like as a motorist as well. So you can see here, group of cyclists here, high vis, ready to go. These are all the stakeholders who want to make sure that this is a, you know, an appropriate treatment. As well as that, just got some portable traffic lights and a token car doing different maneuvers, left turn, right turn through, just to make sure everything is working. I'll show you how this looks on a plan view as well. And yeah, so cyclists got to experience it, and they also got to hop off the saddle and drive the car as well to make sure that both road user perspectives were adequately felt, and it was generally considered a good idea, and it got the tick of approval. This one here also clearly illustrates just how good that left turn offset is, because you've got the cyclist and pedestrian. I should have mentioned as well that pedestrians were part of this study as well, and they're much more in line with that line of sight triangle there. That pedestrian, that cyclist may be a little bit out of it, but at least the motorists will be thinking, I need to slow down because this is a clear crossing point. So I think that illustrates it quite well. But yeah, there's a one-to-one scale of the exact project, so it could be tested and trialed, and thankfully it did receive the tick of approval and we got this infrastructure installed. And I'm just going to progress these next few slides to show exactly how it feels as a cyclist who is traveling through. I'm not going to actually draw it because I forgot that I did arrows of these slides as well. But the cyclist is traveling through, and this taxi here conveniently was turning left. So it's just to illustrate how that feels as a cyclist in a protected intersection. And we'll compare that, and I'll show you an arrow of what a traditional intersection looks like as well. So this yellow arrow is suggesting how at a conventional intersection a cyclist would travel through. The greenish arrow there is obviously the left turn maneuver of the taxi there. Going up a little bit closer to the intersection now, you can see that yellow line is the path that cyclists would traditionally take. That distance there, or that offset from the left turn vehicle, is not that significant. And so in a conventional intersection, a cyclist would be like, hang on, is that taxi going to see me? Should I slam on the brakes? Should I give way to them? Or are they going to stop and give way to me? You know, who's really going to be assuming the priority? And in this still environment, it may be an obvious scenario. If you're on the bike, on the saddle, and you're traveling 20, 30 kilometers per hour and the vehicle's traveling at similar speeds, that's a split-second decision. You need to make either I'm going to travel on through, or I'm going to slam on the brakes and give way to that left-turning vehicle. This next arrow shows the route that the protected intersection encourages cyclists to take. So you can see the offset from a conventional, the offset to the protected intersection design. And it's just reiterating that point that was mentioned at the start of providing a greater offset from that traffic lane to where cyclists are crossing has an amazing benefit on motorists being able to see the cyclist. So the next slide here is basically at the crossing location. If you were the yellow cyclist and you decided to travel on through, there's not a lot of room there for you to safely make that before you're colliding with the bumper of the vehicle there, or, you know, luckily the motorist actually gives way to you. This is the arrow, obviously, of the left turn maneuver, and that's where cyclists would be crossing. Once again, you can clearly see that offset there, very significant. And the other reason I really like this slide is because if we have a look at the driver within the taxi, you can kind of get from the gesture of that profile that their eyesight is focused towards the crossing point. So you can kind of see that they are looking towards where cyclists are crossing, which is the whole benefit of this design. It's no longer a cyclist who's behind you. A cyclist is going to be crossing in front of you. So that guy's doing a great job. We love to see that. I can see a question that just came through there, which I might just pop in, but how is priority communicated to the cyclist? So it's a bit difficult to see in that photo there, but there are bicycle lanterns. So there is a green phase that has the bicycle symbol on it to show that cyclists have priority. So that cyclists are aware that they get to cycle straight on through there. They've got the green light, they can go. So that's basically how it's communicated. On approach to the intersection, we need to acknowledge that any obstructions that would impact on the visual cues to motorists that there is cyclists within that bicycle lane. This one's from the Vic Roads document or Department of Transport. I actually prefer the New Zealand one, which I think makes things a little bit clearer because it tells you the stories from both sides. It's important to have a clear zone from the intersection from both the perspective of a motorist who can see cyclists and are aware that they need to give way, as well as a cyclist seeing a motorist. So they're aware that this motorist won't be able to see them, they need to slow down and give way. if you have, most commonly, your parked cars would extend, close to the intersection. If they extend too close to the intersection, it's really, really difficult to be able to spot one another. And so that's what this slide is all about, is just ensuring that there's adequate sight lines as you approach the intersection. All right, I've done lots of talking about the protected intersections, so we'll move on to the next topic. Ken, do you want me to answer any questions?
No, doing well, Max. Let's keep ticking along because half an hour to go, or just under.
So we'll move on to signalized intersections, and it's that time of day where we ask, what's wrong with this photo? So we've got a confused cyclist there looking at what's going on. I'll just pop her away so we can get a clearer view. I'll move that banner down as well so we can have a look. Want to chuck into the chat anything wrong with this photo?
Now, it's obviously not in Australia or New Zealand, this one. Oh,
no, this one's in Canada.
Right.
No, there's no snow today, but this one was taken in Canada.
Okay. Let's have a look. A few things coming in. So we got poor surface, cyclists have to ride backwards, cluttered, going straight on towards one-way road, coming the other way. Sharrows as priority, question marks. So they're sort of ones that bikes on there. Sight lines to vehicles on right, just confusing.
Yeah, beautiful.
Some good ones there.
I think they're all good examples. Super confusing layout. I'm not sure. These diagonal crossings, I've got to say, are not common at all, but they seem to be used in the US. One of the things that I would kind of consider a pretty big risk is it seems that the cyclists, they get their own lantern that's faced towards them on that diagonal. I'd be really concerned that this motorist would still be able to sight that lantern and see the green and then just head straight through the intersection. So that would be something that I would be flagging. But yeah, this is an example of a bi-directional path that's being transferred on one side of the road to the other side of the road. This cyclist, he's got places to be. He's just going on his own direction, but that's okay. He's on a little adventure. But yeah, there's a lot to question here. I'm not suggesting this is a best practice example, just showing that other jurisdictions have different ways of doing things. And yeah, it's just an interesting thing. And also you may have noticed that the plant is there next to the bicycle lane. Who's looking after that? Is that a risk? I don't know. But that's something that always catches my eye. Anyway, there's no right or wrong answers there. Just wanted to use this as an example. There's a lot going on there, a lot to take in.
Yeah, no, it might. I mean, it's a difficult one to swap sides with a bi-directional facility like this, and the intersection is the logical point to do it. But yeah, and then there are rare, the occasional circumstance where you have maybe a park on one side, so it's really easy to do that there because there's not access points and all of that. And then you cross a major road and it's actually the other side that you want to be doing. So yeah, anyway, I think it's interesting, but let's keep ticking along. Max?
No problem. Okie dokie. So head starts, or the little storage boxes that commonly occur at signalized intersections. You've probably seen them just driving along. Sometimes they're colored in green, other times it's just the bicycle symbolic paint. The idea is that cyclists prop and wait in front of the motorist, so that whenever they're performing their movement or maneuver, the cyclist is right there in front of them. It's a whole lot safer than being to the side of the vehicle or, behind the vehicle or something like that. So very, very good advice to install these at signalized intersections. And you'll note that there's a few different examples there of what to be installing. I'll start off by saying example C, super rare. Don't know why you'd install that. It's really confusing. If you have like these separate cycle lanes, it means at some stage a cyclist had to cut across here to get access to this point, which just seems a silly way to do things. If a cyclist was in this lane, you could just extend that storage box kind of like this and then let them hop across like that. So there is a little bit of advice when to use each of these different head start arrangements, which you can find in section 5.3.5 of the cycling aspects. But as I said, example C is not a common arrangement, so I wouldn't spend too much time on that one. Another kind of cool thing to note about these, although it just seems like a little storage box and, you know, a place for cyclists to prop, it can also be used as a means of wayfinding, because if you've got an example like this, this would suggest that cyclists either want to be turning left at that intersection or going straight ahead. We don't want to be encouraging cyclists to turn right. And there may be a very good reason not to do that. It could be a major arterial, it could be heading to a freeway or something like that. So that type of arrangement is subtly sending that message that we should be prioritizing movement in these directions. Conversely, in example D, you'll see that the storage box encapsulates left turn through and right turn movements. So cyclists can theoretically travel in any direction or take any movement there. So it's another thing to consider exactly where you want your cyclists going after the intersection, and that can influence what type of storage box you'd be installing. The final thing I'll touch on this slide here is our hook turn storage boxes. As mentioned before, we use them lots in Vic and in New Zealand as well. There's plenty of these out there. I think they're a really good thing to be doing. They are a good way, if you could imagine an intersection, and rather than having to get in your right turn lane, and if you've got your bicycle lane here and crossing over all this traffic, that can be a very stressful environment. So instead, what we can recommend is, I might just draw this intersection out so it can be a little bit clearer of what I'm talking about. Something like that. So rather than the cyclist doing that maneuver, they would be taking the cycle lane and then taking a little area here where there would be a hook turn storage box or an area that's marked on the ground that they can pause and wait here. And it's also in front of traffic as well, which is another good thing, and also in front of pedestrians. So they can prop there safely. They're away from the through lanes, and then when general traffic gets the green to travel through, they can then just travel through this intersection there like that. So basically creating it in two different phases, that right turn, but eliminating the need to cross over all those traffic lanes to get there. Ken?
Max, I might just steal your screen for a second, because I was actually writing one the other day and decided to just film it quickly. So here it is. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Yep. So coming up as exactly as you say, wanting to go right here and prop myself in there.
Beautiful. Here's one we prepared earlier. Look at that.
Yeah,
that's good
good
stuff.
fun. There's a little issue with this one, but I won't get into it. But great.
Thank you, Ken. That's come back to my presentation now?
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. So yeah, they're a super thing to use, and rather than, as I mentioned, having to travel across and get into the right turn lane, you've just got this added option. So I'm a big fan of them. Left turn and through treatments. These ones are a little trickier. If we're not looking at protected intersections, then managing this conflict can be challenging. And it's generally done through pavement markings and conflict paint. Here's an example of two different arrangements. So for those that can't really picture it, in this example on the left-hand side, we've basically got the bicycle lane ending, and we've got our sharrows there. Remember our sharrows, and this is telling both motorists and cyclists that cyclists now share the traffic lane. So they're no longer required to ride on the curb side. They can ride right in the middle of the traffic lane. And this is meant to, or it does illustrate that it's no longer cyclists are over there, vehicles are here. We're all sharing in this space. So this is one way to do it. Another method to do it is creating a little bent out cycle lane here that then gets cyclists out and away from that left turn treatment. So rather than share it, they've kind of got the bicycle lane that's maintained all the way through to the intersection. It may be difficult to get that within existing carriageways, but that is an option. If you do have the space to do this treatment, I'd also recommend or consider, if it is feasible, if you can install like little speed cushions or something just prior to where cyclists, where that conflict point is, because that will just once again slow down motorists and make it obvious that this is a cyclist crossing point. So theoretically, if you did have the road width available to install something like this, you could look at installing speed cushions as well to help reduce speeds there. You may also have a risk then of motorists just going, all right, I'm not going around that and do this kind of movement instead. But yeah, there's a few details that you could look at to help improve that. I'll go back to an anecdote and we'll have a look at Max's ride to work back in the day when we used to ride to work, I suppose. But I started my journey out in the morning. This is my bicycle lane on the right-hand side of the screen. On-road bicycle lane next to the parking lane. So this is a clear example of a dooring risk. Not a perfect example, but this is just the world we live in. And you can see as I approach the intersection here, I'm given a sharrow there. So exactly as that previous example alluded to, my bicycle lane ends, but I'm given a sharrow. So I'm like, okay, I just take control. I'm in the middle of the left turn lane now, and I'm sharing this environment with general traffic. This approach, I suppose I'm a confident cyclist, so I'm perhaps biased, but it's better than nothing. And it's if this was provided at every intersection, as opposed to just cutting it off and not doing anything, I think that's at least a step forward. But it's certainly not best practice. If we could do protected intersections everywhere, that'd be awesome. But just wanted to show that is a solution that you could offer in this space, because it is challenging with narrow widths available. But let's have a look at how Max gets home. So heading in the opposite direction now, you can see very similar on-road cycling environment next to the parking lane within the dooring zone, all the same. And then after this bicycle pavement, the lane disappears and there's nothing. And motorists are working out, all right, do I want to get in the left lane? Do I want to go through? Do I want to go right? And as a cyclist, you're making that same decision as well. Where do I go? Do I go into the left lane? Or do I go into the central lane and go through? And you can see at the other side of the intersection on the departure side, the bicycle lane does start again. So this is a perfect example of giving up at the intersection, of just thinking, I don't know what to do here, so I'm just going to get rid of the bicycle lane and good luck. So Max has traveled to work. Not too bad. It's manageable. It's not ideal, but my travel from work was, unfortunately, that was a stressful part, because motorists are much more focused on the signal phasing and making sure they get the green, and that's what they're looking at basically, as opposed to me, who just wants to cycle straight on through that environment and try and get out of there as quickly as possible. Ken?
A couple of things. So if you're heading straight ahead in the shallow left turn lane, wouldn't you block the cars behind if they are on a separate left turn phase? I'm not sure there is a separate left turn phase on that one.
No, there isn't. That's right. So this was just a green. So if you were heading straight through, then you're heading straight through. You shouldn't be blocking anyone as long as you've got the green there. Yep.
There's a shallow equivalent to a bike awareness zone. I'd like to know what your thoughts are
Yeah.
With
So that's just another terminology. I think they use that in the WA, and I've seen it over in the States as well. Bike awareness zone, just an area of local calming traffic management treatments, and sharrows are used in combination. So I suppose the zone itself is the umbrella term, and then sharrows make up a portion of that.
right. Are they desirable these days? Is that a good thing, do you think?
Yeah, particularly in like residential areas where there's low speeds, low volumes. I think it's a good idea to have cyclists, cycling right in the middle of the lane, as opposed to being pushed to the dooring zone, or you're not going to get protected bicycle lanes in every single street. So I do think that there's lots of benefit in having them.
Yep. And should they be yellow? Should sharrows be yellow?
So we currently, as part of Victoria, we've got all these pop-up bike lanes, and lots of, all of the treatments associated with that program, they've used yellow line marking, which includes yellow sharrows. And the idea is to show that it's temporary in nature, and, to indicate that this is part of that pop-up bike lane. I get it for that type of storytelling, but I wouldn't see that as a, let's every single jurisdiction do yellow pavement markers, because I think the white is more understood perhaps as just general line marking. Yellow could seem gimmicky, or I'm not a psychologist, but I think there's, I would generally stick to the whites.
Yep. No, I tend to agree with that. And okay. So Carolyn's saying tempting to get them approved in WA. Yellow is associated with advisory generally, and white's more regulatory generally.
That's a good point.
Yep. So I think that might give it a bit more strength as well. So,
Yep.
All right, Max, you've got about 10 minutes to go.
I've got, okay. Oh yeah, right. There you go. They're flying through. Let's go for it. Left turn and through treatments continue across slip lanes. These are particularly difficult environments to design for if we're not getting protected intersections. So I'd love it if we could just get cyclists off-road, and then traveling at a controlled crossing point, ideally raised and things like that. Appreciate that may be challenging in the number of these environments that we have, across the network. But I did just want to show this particular example. One of the good parts of it is the conflict zone, where motorists are crossing over the bicycle lane, kind of only extends to those points there. However, you can see that the green conflict paint is being extended both on approach and departure, really just making it clear that, this is a cycling space, and it's not just at the conflict, but let's just get it in the minds of motorists before you start to turn left, look for cyclists here. The same is done on the other leg there as well. So although it's called conflict paint, you don't necessarily always have to install it where the conflict point exists, and people may find that upsetting to hear because that's what the Australian standards here. But I'm all for using green paint, as a means of wayfinding, or there's a risk ahead, or, I think it's just anything to do with cycling infrastructure. You pop down the green paint, motorists recognize, okay, cyclists. So yeah, I appreciate that you can't have it everywhere because you may not have the money to install it, but I think there's a real argument to be had that we can, slightly increase it, and it may not necessarily adhere to Australian standards, but it will have improved benefits. Okay, I talked about these hook turns before, so hopefully that was familiar, but just wanted to include this diagram in there before, and you can see that's another example of where green has been used. So cyclist green, that's a good outcome. And here's just a real life example of those hook turns in place. Not as good as Ken's example, but there you go, on each of the quadrants of the intersection. So cyclists can store and prop there and wait for their phase. And that's what it looks like down on the ground. So they are a really good device to be installing, and something to think about And it goes back to that anecdote I was sharing before of if you don't want cyclists traveling in a particular direction, so you don't want them performing a U-turn, then, sorry, a hook turn, then just make sure that you're not incorporating that as part of your design. I'm going to chat about bicycle signals now. And for those that aren't familiar with what I'm talking about there, it's basically your own lantern with the bicycle symbol there, and cyclists generally have a head start, so they go through the intersection first. Difficult to see on this particular photo here, but it's been attached to the side of that signal lantern there, and that's got a green bicycle lantern, so that shows up first. So general traffic still on red, and cyclists get to enter the intersection first, which is awesome. Really big win, particularly where there's a left turn conflict, because cyclists get the head start, so they get to move in front of vehicles. They don't need to worry about that conflict point that we were talking about before. If you don't have protected intersections, then that's a really awesome way to help manage that risk. But I wanted to share this particular example as to a certain risk that you need to also think about installing the bicycle lanterns. So the idea is that you're actually installing the bicycle lanterns to facilitate a through movement. So the cyclist gets the green, they travel on through. Makes sense. However, if you're a cyclist and you want to turn right, as I did on one particular day at this intersection, and also have a look at this intersection, there's a lot going on there, isn't there? There's service roads, there's tram tracks, there's, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 traffic lanes to cross. There's a lot to process in a short amount of time. If you could imagine you were a cyclist that wanted to turn right, intuitively, if you see a lantern that says green, that's saying go, you may make the decision that I can turn right because all of those vehicles are stopped, and I've got my own phase now, so I can turn right. But it just goes back to that point where the bicycle lanterns are meant to cater for through movements. And the reason that's so critical in this particular intersection, because it's so large, there would come a stage where general traffic are then given the green as well. So you might get the head start for 5 seconds or so, and maybe that brings you out to this point of the intersection. And then general through traffic have the green light to go, which means you're now in a no man's land essentially, and you are potentially faced with oncoming traffic, or you need to be concerned about, giving way to all those through traffic movements. And there's also a risk of, if you wanted to turn right and the green goes for general traffic as well, right at the start there of you're going across a conflict points with general traffic who want to head on through. So yes, that's something I learned. I wasn't nervous or anything. It's just got in the middle of the intersection and vehicles started to come at me, but luckily managed it with unscathed and everything. But something that I suppose it looks good on paper, but they also have some intricacies to think about as well. And that is that bicycle lanterns means a through movement. So there's got to be a way that we communicate that to cyclists. And that could be done with an arrow to say, cyclists through, even with that as part of the lantern as well, just to make that much clearer for cyclists. And for cyclists that did want to perform that right turn movement, another great example of where you could have had a little spot there for me to pause and wait as like a hook turn, so you can then turn right into that street there. So yeah, just a little anecdote I thought I'd share. Bicycle signals as well, they can be installed as part of the lanterns itself, so it's just on one face. This one's in Perth. So it's just a super thing to be doing if you've got cycle priority routes, or you've got strategic networks where you've acknowledged we want cyclists using this particular road. That's when providing them the head start, giving them that green before general traffic will just make that such an attractive corridor. So it has that benefit, of being a more comfortable and just a better experience, but it's also got safety implications as well. It's really handy to be able to head out into the intersection first, prior to a left turn vehicle, both being given at the same time. That is the end of the session day. I will check in with Ken to see if we had any questions.
There's some good discussion about green markings, green paint, the use of it, using it sparingly, the striped approach that you showed in one of the other slides, the potential for it being slippery and the treatments and how to go about it. So I think that's just good discussion going on in the group there. And that last one with the bicycle head start actually links back to a point made by somebody a lot earlier that it works really well in combination with the head start box. So that's pretty good. Okay, 3 minutes.
Fabulous. So I just shared this last image here. So the protected intersection in Melbourne, as part of the work, they were also updating this intersection as well. And in constructing those wonderful safety improvements, this was the temporary traffic management in place. So we had a bicycle lane and then a good old fashioned bicycle lane closed, merged right. So obviously not thinking of how could a cyclist merge right in that environment, where are they going? And I just think there's such an irony in you've got this wonderful cycling project that is set to be delivered, but in the meantime, let's just do whatever we want and not think about cycling safety. And the reason that this is so critical to think about is where this cyclist has come from, which was actually a protected facility. So you've got to think about the users of a protected facility. They may not feel comfortable being near general traffic at all. That's the reason they've chosen this as a route. You've then popped in this temporary environment where you're forcing them to merge with general traffic, which is generally one of the most stressful things to do as a cyclist. So you're potentially getting inexperienced cyclists in a high pressure situation and forcing them to make this decision. Well, where do I go? It's something that I'd like everyone just to take away from this. If you are involved in any of these projects, well, what's the lead up to that project? How are things going to be managed? Because you could also really benefit from having like a curb ramp here. And for cyclists that don't want to get anywhere near the motorist, don't want to be in the general traffic lane, you can just do cyclist dismount, which is also, like, I'm not saying that's a fantastic outcome, but it's better than forcing everyone into an unsafe environment that they don't feel comfortable riding in. And instead, get cyclists. Ideally, if they could ride along there, create a shared path, that'd be fantastic. But even if you have to just say, cyclists dismount, use the footpath for 100 meters or so, and then they can get back onto their route.
All right. Last 30 seconds. What do they have to do after this session?
So we do have a module quiz that is up on Moodle there. So we'll get you to finish that for our last session on Thursday, and also get you to watch the 360-degree video footage. And next session, we'll get your insights as to how you found that, looking at different intersections and exactly how that felt from the perspective of the saddle. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you on Thursday.
Fabulous.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Bye.